Welcome. This will be my video on the 2002 movie City of God. I am going to start with a review that's going to have zero spoilers, and once I've completed that, and I'll verbally let you know when I get there, I will start what I call the thought section, where I discuss the movie going into spoilers. The movie is rated R, and so will this video be. And yeah, I fucking love this movie. I used to own this on DVD, and I have no idea where that disc is anymore. I figure I must have lent it to someone who didn't return it or something. So I'm recording this right after rewatching it. I guess by now I've watched it about half a dozen times, maybe more. I hadn't watched this movie in something like 15, maybe 20 years. And yet there was so much I still remembered. It really makes an impression on you. And as it is Black History Month, that is why I'm doing this now. I'm going to try to focus on some of the aspects where it, yeah, it is basically a crime story in the vein of, and I'm not the first person to compare them, but yeah, not dissimilar from Scorsese. There's some Guy Ritchie going on, perhaps some Tarantino. At least one person compared it to Once Upon a Time in America, which also makes a lot of sense. But it is one of those crime stories, but focused on largely black people, and set in Brazil, where it was also filmed, and a number of the people working on it have a direct connection to the favelas of Brazil. And it is very careful to not tell a story that is like essentially KKK propaganda, which, I mean, Trump is probably going to try to bring that kind of thing back. But it's also not like, so I feel weird making this reference, but I think it is appropriate. It's been so long since I watched like old Sidney Poitier movies, but from what I remember, yeah, like some of his early career was basically just conveying to white people, hey, black people are human beings too, like around the time of the Civil Rights Act and everything. And yeah, this is not really that they are human beings in this and in real life, you know. And I think that does bring us into, so basically, yeah, it chronicles some years of living in the titular City of God, very ironically named, slums of Brazil. And we're basically seeing, I've seen some people say that this movie does slightly fall into this trap of making it seem as though violent crime is a matter exclusively of low character. And obviously sometimes it is. Some people will, include, there's some of that in this movie. Some people will put on masks, go out and commit violent crimes, figuring that the masks and guns will mean that they can escape any kind of consequence. We're seeing that right now with ICE. But there is also, I'm afraid I cannot attribute this quote. My wrist is too fucking sore to look it up right now, but there is a quote that goes something along the lines of, poverty, or maybe it's need, is the mother of crime. And that is very much clear here, as it is true in real life. And it also gets into the cycle of violence. And the yeah, so I'm not gonna, as mentioned, I'm not spoiling this, so I won't say if it's everyone, but certainly a decent percentage of the characters here are just different shades of morally gray. There might be at least one that you could say, okay, that person is just evil, but it's not really a movie overflowing with perfect victims and people who are just truly innocent. It's just different degrees of law breaking because they don't have any other options. Like, actually working for a living is brought up here. And it's not made to look particularly promising because they're poor and it's a capitalist system, and I think that might more or less. Yeah, honestly, I'll continue on the. So I mentioned, Scorsese is probably the reference I feel is most, like if Scorsese was more open to making stuff about, like, I appreciate he has more recently done at least some about people of color. At some point, I will watch Killers of the Flower Moon. I promise. I'm not certain if I'm going to do a video on it. We'll see. But yeah, for a long time, he tended to focus on white Americans, Italian Americans, and such. And to be fair, that is something he understands really well, and I don't know. I think a case could be made that, this would not have been anywhere near as good if it hadn't been made by people who actually know this area, this world. But yeah, like, this is what Scorsese would make if, he was Brazilian. And it also does not feel like just a ripoff. It's not too dissimilar from the way that you can clearly see, when you watch District 9, and I think that movie is worth watching. It's really more after that the director started to fall off a little bit. But if you watch that, you can very clearly tell. And no, I'm afraid I don't remember. I used to be fucking obsessed with his work, but you can see that he has an admiration for David Cronenberg. There's definitely some The Fly going on in District 9, but it's not like literally, okay, let's just do the same fucking thing. But yeah, we have a fairly, there's a pretty decent number of characters here, and you have some voiceover that says, oh, this person, this is their name, here's a little bit of information from them. And something I thought worked really well here is that then the narrator will say, they're important, but it's not time for their story yet. And you genuinely, like, I've shown this to maybe half a dozen people. All of them were hooked. Like, throughout, you cannot take your eyes off this. You really badly want to, wait, what is that person's story? And I guess I can only really speak for myself. I personally found all of these stories to live up to this tease. None of them were just like, oh, that? Really? That's all? And let's see, I guess that does pretty much cover the, yeah. So the psychological accuracy, authenticity, and level of detail are all very impressive. I can appreciate there's at least one character in this. I mentioned there's at least one character here that arguably is kind of evil. I think if you really look at the way this character behaves, reacts to certain situations, like, I don't really want to armchair diagnose, but I feel like there's probably something going on there. Like, that's and also I'm not trying to fucking say, oh, if you have mental health problems, you must be dangerous and evil. That's not what I'm saying. But yeah, I'm not sure I would really say there's any character here where it feels like they just didn't really put thought into why would this person behave like this. And yeah, the authenticity, like from frame one, you feel like you are right there in the favela. And I love that this is not purely about the struggle. It's there. The struggle is real. It's not shying away from that. I disagree with those who say this glamorizes. I suppose I've already mentioned, what I would argue it does instead. I understand where they're coming from, but that's also an argument that has been made about Scorsese's films. I'm not making excuses for, like, I haven't watched all of his movies, so it's possible that at least some of them do, but I would definitely say stuff like Goodfellas, Casino, Gangs of New York, I wouldn't really say they're glamorizing. I don't know. I think sometimes, I'm not saying this is always the case, but sometimes when you see someone say, oh, this is kind of glamorizing, it's like, well, it's being honest about it. It's saying, yeah, like some of these people do enjoy, at least at times, this kind of lifestyle. I mean, that's just saying the truth. Like, I've never walked away from a Scorsese movie thinking, oh, I should definitely do that really fucked up thing that I saw the characters do. It's not as though media cannot affect our perceptions. There's like the movie 300 was actually used to hype up troops for, one of the forever wars that America is engaged in, specifically in the Middle East. But right, I guess yes. So to get back to what I was saying, it's not really glamorizing, but it is saying, not everything is absolutely terrible. Like, there's people who are in love. There are, there are times where you see people just having fun, just enjoying leisure. Something I do think I have noticed about some of these stories that are claimed to be glamorizing this, kind of, for example, gangster lifestyle. They are sometimes movies where not necessarily every member of law enforcement is crooked, but at least some of them are, and it's not necessarily shown to be unusual, and they are honest about how much it sucks to work under capitalism, especially if you don't have a good amount of money to start with. It can be slow, tedious, extremely difficult to just make enough to get by. And for some of these reviews, like if you read enough of the words of these reviews, you see, oh, that's the thing they don't like. That's what I'm not saying it's a universal law, but for sure, some of them, it's just that they're like, well, this isn't the propaganda I wanted at all. I wanted something that claimed that capitalism solved all our problems. Spoiler alert, it does not. It causes them. If you haven't already watched, Somewhere News recently did another excellent video criticizing capitalism. Now, I guess that brings us to, so yeah, the level of detail. Yeah, it really, like, there is so much texture here. Like, I am in awe of how many little details that just help sell it that there are. And Yeah, the dialogue, it's one of those things where, so I do not speak the language. I had to rely on subtitles. That's also, some of what I say in this might sound weird because the subtitles were in Danish. I don't think I've ever watched this with English subtitles, so I'll do my best, but so it's difficult for me to judge the writing or delivery of dialogue, but certainly based on the subtitles, yeah, like there's such, like the people in this talk the way that, you know, perhaps not everyone, but in this kind of environment they would in real life. And there is this strong sense of, like, I've mentioned that there's a lot of moral gray, but there is also, the characters are different from one another. You get a sense of who the different ones are. And yeah, the direction is remarkably self-assured. I'm afraid I don't know any other work by, there's almost no one who worked on this that I know from anything else. But there is this, it opens in media res, and there is there's not a huge amount of chronological jumping, but it does bounce between different perspectives, and it works really, really well. Like, there is a tremendous energy here, which, from right away is captured, and is true to this kind of environment. There is a lot of tension and suspense going on here. And yeah, this is a lifestyle that is very dangerous, which makes it all the more tragic that a lot of people don't have a choice. And honestly, I will just briefly mention, like, one of the very first things we see here, it opens on us seeing, like, vendors and such in the favela, and we see someone sharpen a knife. And ultimately, it is for food preparation. It's not for killing humans, but it's still, like, it immediately, right now I forget if it was, I watched two trailers before this, the original and the modern re-edit. I think it might have been the modern re-edit, but I forget. But one of them did indeed feature that knife being sharpened, and yeah, like, immediately, it's not dissimilar from the way that American Psycho, the movie, opens. Like, we see something and we don't know immediately what it is, and we assume violence because of what, like, you don't have to know very much about either of these stories to make that leap. And then we see a bunch of people chasing after a runaway chicken. It counted its eggs before they hatched, and it is out of there. And this is obviously not the most, like, it's not necessarily violent. It doesn't require violence, but immediately you appreciate, there is, like, the energy, and, at least some of the people chasing after this chicken do indeed have weaponry. And yeah, I think that pretty much covers that aspect. Yeah, I was never, like, despite how fast it moves and how many characters there are, it's not a movie that keeps you at arm's length. In my experience, you really get into it. The cinematography is phenomenal. There is this mix of shots from different, like, some of the shots it's, both the camera and the subject are moving very fast. Sometimes it's very close up, and then it'll cut to a wide shot, and it has this, like, it's the kind of thing that could be disorienting. It is in something like 28 Days Later, for example, but here it just captures this. I need more. I need a thesaurus. Energy, and let's see. Yeah, the editing is also really solid. Like, again, it genuinely is impressive how this juggles so many characters, and yeah. Right, I guess this is a good time to talk about. So the narration is one of those things where you have to be careful not to let that just be, an easy out, which, like, fair enough. Even Kubrick would sometimes just be like, I don't know, just narrate, yeah. I'm not saying that Show Don't Tell is always the case, because there's too much going on in some stories, including this one, for everything to be visually established. But yeah, they are careful to not have too much of it. It's there when it really needs to be. And the production value is great. It helps that, some of this was indeed filmed in favelas. I did read that it was not filmed in the City of God favela because it would be too dangerous. But just, yeah, it looks and sounds so good. And yeah, set design, locations, costumes, and makeup are all very impressive and help convey things about the various characters. You see how someone decorates their home, where they work, that sort of thing. The music is great. Like, there is, original score that is very impactful, but there's also several, like, absolute bangers on the soundtrack. Like, there's some James Brown, the Godfather of Soul. There's one point where they play Kung Fu Fighting, just, yeah. And to be clear, that part is set in the 80s. So now the sound design is also great. There are times where you do not see something, but you sure do hear it. And it actually has a stronger impact than if it did show everything. The acting is deeply impressive. Like, even the literal children, I'm not using that figuratively. I'm not talking about, these teenagers, they're so immature. No, there's actual, like, yeah, they're still so impressive. And this was one of those cases where they were very careful to cast up-and-comers and people who didn't have any, they had the talent, but they hadn't been discovered yet. And it adds so much. Like, the authenticity is really... I think the only person from this that I've seen anything else is Alice Braga, who even back then, like, I'm so glad she's still acting. She's just so incredibly talented, It hasn't been very many years since I last saw her in something recent, so yeah. And she's one of those, like, unfortunately, Hollywood has not always known how to, like, really, utilize her properly. She doesn't always get the respect she deserves, but yeah, like, in this, she really, yeah, very, very impressive. So the pacing, like, the movie doesn't particularly slow down. It's always moving, but it's also not rushing. I've seen some people say they found it to be excessive. This was made at a time when that was sometimes the case, but I would argue that, there are other movies and there are shows and such from this same time that do struggle with that. I would argue this one does not, but I do also appreciate, like, for some it will be, and that is sometimes, some movie reviewers, I'm not trying to, like, what's it called again? Engage in ageism or something, but some movies, if they're made for a very young audience, in this case, not very young, but young, like, I would say the ideal audience member for this is probably in their 20s or late teens. And yeah, if you have someone who's several decades older than that, who grew up on movies that moved slower, including ones about this, Goodfellas, for its time, moves fast. I'm not, like, that's not a criticism of that movie. That movie moves as fast as it should. But yeah, those reviewers might say, oh, this movie just moves too fast. And, I appreciate there's some subjective, it's hard to be completely objective when talking about media. I'm not claiming that I do an amazing job. And I think that does bring us to, so the, yeah, it finds a good balance between humor and the sense of threat, the ominous nature of this world. And I also really appreciated, I think there's value to when characters are having fun, but the audience are not. Like, we just kind of want them to stop because the thing that is amusing them is horrifying to us. And that is utilized very well here. And yeah, so some have said that they found the violence to be numbing in this. Now, I've personally never felt that way, but then first time I watched this, I was in my late teens, and that again, I think is a thing. I remember, let's see. I guess it's difficult to pin down an exact decade because, like, it really is, no matter who you ask, if they remember far enough back, they will point to different things. And technically, like, some of the most intense violence I've ever seen, if it is not quite as frequent as more recent decades, is in the original All Quiet on the Western Front, which I believe is from 1929 or thereabouts, So it can be difficult to pinpoint, but certainly the 80s and onwards, there is a tendency to increase violence. Like, every so often you'll get something that is very toned down, and certainly, in recent years, a bunch of stuff has been PG-13, which in the 80s and 90s would have been R. And but yeah, it is about as violent as you might expect, considering when it came out and what it's about. And personally, I have not found that there is a single act of violence in this that does not move me. And I think it actually really balances, because there is a lot, and a certain percentage of it, which I'm not going to give away before the spoiler section, is meaningless. It's stuff that could have been avoided. And it's the kind of thing that in real life would be numbing, but they, in my opinion, and that of at least some of the people that I've shown it to, it stops just short. It manages to get right up to that edge and not cross the line. So we feel like, will this ever end? Is this just going to keep going? But we are not, in my experience, we do not reach the point where we're just like, okay, can this just end already? And that was a problem for movies around the same time. I am going to discuss the use of violence in greater detail in the spoiler section, but without examples. It's without spoilers. It's yeah. In a number of ways, this leans left. There is a little bit of stuff where it is not like 100% like, yeah. I'll get into it in the spoiler section. And yeah, I'll briefly talk about, so the social environment of the film and of, you know, these kinds of environments in real life. There is so much homophobia and shaming of, it's a very macho culture, and that includes some misogyny, and the movie tends to not itself be misogynist, but there is at least one thing I'll discuss in the spoiler section where perhaps it could have done a better job. But then there's also at least one thing here where it's like, that was an excellent rebuttal of misogyny. Some characters are obsessed with, when a guy loses his virginity, and violence is kind of seen as just a matter of course. Like, it's just the way of the world. A lot of characters in this can't really imagine anything else. And yeah, like, it's the kind of thing where it could so easily end up feeling like, oh, these people, I guess they're just born bad. But it manages to imbue enough humanity. Like, there are a number of characters in this. I hate what they do. I understand why they do it. And I just wish they would stop. I don't wish someone would go and stop them with violence. I wish they would be given opportunity. But, under capitalism, that is not necessarily gonna... Yeah. This is a 9 out of 10 movie. And yeah, I hope I have helped you decide whether or not to watch it. Again, it's fine if you don't end up watching it based on this, especially if it's because of, like, it is definitely too violent for a number of people. But that's another thing. Like, I do really appreciate how much, like, some of the violence, it's not really about, like, oh, so graphic. It's more, but you didn't have to do that. And it's about how it affects the person engaging it or their loved ones. And so instead of showing bodies being riddled with bullets, it's showing the gunman, perhaps even zoomed in on their face, and we're just seeing how it is for them to engage in this. And that's part of why it works so well. And that brings us to the thoughts section. So once again, from here on out, I am spoiling absolutely everything about this movie. And I think I'm going to try to keep it more or less chronological. There we go. I need a new computer. I'm hoping to buy one within the year because this thing is lagging. There we go. So, I think I've pretty much said everything I needed to about the opening. I will just note this thing of, yeah, at least one of these gang members actually fire a gun at this chicken. And it's like, aren't you trying to sell it, though? Are you not trying to, like, you catch it, cook it, sell it? Do you not think that a bullet in its body might be detrimental to that purpose? But when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And I did also appreciate, yeah, you see Rocket, like, this is not the first time that he has either caught a chicken that was running away or at least seen someone, because he's absolutely, yeah, my father spent some of his youth on a farm. Once he had the chance to, he got chickens. So I have indeed helped catch chickens. It's great cardio. Helps teach you to adapt. And yeah. He's also gotten better at keeping them from running away, but some of them are very persistent. And yeah, if you've never fed a chicken, I appreciate that not everybody's going to get into a situation where it's feasible for them to be able to do so, but it really is great. Like, I guess probably feeding birds in general is a very, positive experience, but it really is great seeing, yeah. And when you get new chickens for a while, when you bring something, they just immediately, get into it. But my father has a habit of spoiling, any living thing he loves with something that tastes good. And so sometimes if you bring just the regular food, they'll look down at it and look up at you, and it's very clear. Like, they don't speak English, but side eye can be universal. They're like, this is it? No, 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 get us the good stuff, from the others. Yeah. And the first time you serve them something that they've never had before, but you feel like they're probably gonna like. I still remember giving them ketchup for the first time because they like soft stuff that is easy for them to, yeah, they dug into that like it was no tomorrow. And I've officially talked for chickens for too long. Anyway, yes, the way he stands, Rocket, is indeed exactly how you want to. And the way that it then goes from this, yeah, like these gangsters who are, perhaps not doing the best job at catching it, and also appreciate, little Z shoving this one person out the road who's like just doing his job. When you're carrying stuff like that, you don't want to make too fast movements, and it's not his fault. Like, he didn't release that chicken. And yeah, I also thought they did a good job on, like, yeah, this chicken, it can see other, its sisters being caught and or yeah, being taken and slaughtered, and yeah. So as soon as it's able to, there's the string around its leg, and eventually it's able to get loose of that. But yeah, it goes from them trying to catch the chicken, and then it's like, oh, Rocket, capture it. And then the cops show up behind them. Because that is, like, for so long, little Z has been used to the cops wouldn't touch him. And then he fucked things up for himself. And now they are after him. And it didn't occur to him, hey, maybe don't, And I appreciate, by the end, we return to that scenario. There's, I don't know, 90 minutes or something between, when we first see that and when we see the resolution. And ultimately, there is not exchange of gunfire there. But it sets up that this is a world where, yeah, you can go between chicken catching and facing the police within seconds of each other, and the ending of the film does have violence. There is actual gang war in the streets, and all because little Z could not control himself. And I guess that does get us back to, yeah, so, we spend some time back in the 1970s, and I think they do a largely good job with Rocket of not just making him like the perfect victim, like a saint kind of thing, because, like, he does engage in at least a little bit of criminality. The guy from Sao Paulo is when, and the reason he didn't rob someone else someplace else before that was that, oh, they were nice to him. They're people from the favela. They smiled at him. Was it him or his friend, I forget, who got like a free ride on the bus because they live in City of God, this sort of thing. And yeah, like, there are people out there who do engage in some criminality, but if, the person they're dealing with is so nice, then they might not. And then on the other hand, you have people like Little Z, who does just do these awful things. Like he is genuinely described as having a thirst for blood. And yeah, I love the way that this is bookended by child mobsters. Little Z and Benny, more so Little Z, he's the more violent one. And, yeah, he used to hate the adults for not letting him get ahead. And then near the end, he gets killed by child mobsters who are taking revenge for him shooting, and having shot one of the people who, yeah. And I guess that does bring us to the, yeah, one area where, it could easily get into like really fucked up, territory of blaming people for their own situation. There's that thing about how smart people in the favela, in City of God, do not become mobsters. That's something that happens to those who are not smart. And, that's very dicey territory because, like, what was it Matt Walsh recently, tweeted about, like, how Renee Good was killed for, low IQ Somalis, and it's so humiliating for her. What a fascinating, but for him, unsurprising read of her being killed by ICE. As she was leaving, because they had guns and were trying to get into her vehicle. Like, what did you think was going to happen when you fought so hard to make them fear you? Yeah, like some of them are, yeah. If you haven't already watched, I think Legia Miller has done some of the best videos on ICE killing Renee Good. Now, so, saying that black people who are violent and criminals are just low IQ, that's something where you have to be very careful. And, I mean, we do see, at the end of the day, like, Rocket just barely makes it, and he does engage in some criminality, and it's kind of just, like, I mean, is it because he's too smart to be criminal? Like, that assumes that they have much other options. Like, think about how he's fired and not given severance pay because he's thought to be in on the crime, and there's no proof of that. Like, what, because he talked to them, because he gave them weed a while back and they remember him? Like, there's a lot of kids who will remember if someone, gives them something that they like. That has nothing to do with being a fucking criminal, and the employer doesn't even have to prove that Rocket was a criminal, and so he's fired, yeah. So the and we also have, Knockout Ned. He's like, oh, I worked hard, I got an education, I was in the army, I still know how to fight, this was the only job I could get, so it doesn't make you smart to not be, like, ideally no one would be a violent criminal, obviously, but it's economical. It's not about the strength of character. Like, Rocket is not a more violent criminal than, there's a very, very, very low, very minimal amount of, because they do, oh shit, right now I forget, my fucking short-term memory is completely busted, but I forget if they did go through with it or they were stopped because there were cops nearby, but they were going to at least rob the guy from, Sao Paulo, and they just know, oh, no one nice is from there, because, like, it's class. It's about, and, before you say, oh, they haven't met everyone from Sao Paulo, they haven't met everyone from other classes. No, but they've met people who treated them like shit and looked down on them for being, like, this guy is literally only giving them the time of day because he needs their help. He's like, I'm fucking lost, which is also like, so you fucked up is what you're saying. Like, you don't make sure to know where you're going. Like, okay, to be clear, I am not victim blaming. I'm not saying anybody deserves to be robbed or something. But it is one of those things where, and I appreciate, back then, he's not gonna like use his smartphone and like a map app to find the way, because he left the charger at home. But it's just one of those things. I can't help but notice when a woman is raped, a lot of cishet white conservative men will say, well, what was she wearing? Was she drunk? Was she married to him? But when a rich person is robbed by a poor person, suddenly they understand that, hey, maybe we should blame the person who did it for doing it. And to be clear, again, there are environmental factors that can increase the likelihood of it. I personally am more, when it comes to doing the wrong thing, I try to be harsher with rich, powerful people because they have the choice to not do it. They are not forced to do the wrong thing. And yet so many of them insist on doing it. But yeah, like the reason that Rocket is not more of a violent criminal is because he is too nice. He doesn't really have the stomach for being cruel to people who are not, awful. But he also says, oh, if you're from Sao Paulo, you must be awful. You must deserve it. And that's the distinction. And he's, the one they keep saying is smart, and he's good at taking these pictures. And he does really have an eye for photography. Like, holy shit. Did he film this movie too? But the, part of the reason he even makes it is that, yeah, Lil Z wants his picture taken. And he looks at it and is like, that really is a good fucking picture. Broken clock theory. Lil Z is right about some things. And let's see, I guess that brings us to, so yeah, yeah, I think we have the motel robbery, Little Z and Benny as children being part of this, and Little Z realizes how, like, and it genuinely, I'm not trying to applaud, this kind of violent crime, but he is right. Like, yeah, robbing a motel, if you have money to go to a place to have sex, yeah, like that's, and it's also like a hotel might have more security, but a motel, it's not necessarily thought of as that, yeah. But because he's a child, they tell him that he has to be lookout. And, it's that thing of like he hates that. And, later when he's working with, children, he just tells them, you cannot rob anyone in the favela. But he also uses violence against them before giving them a chance to show that they're willing to not rob anyone inside the favela, and so they kill him too, and take over his operation. And that's how it so often goes, in real life. But yeah, I thought it worked really well that we don't see immediately, we're just told people were killed, and I think we see at least some dead bodies, but we don't see right away that it was Lil Z who did it. And I think that does, yeah, so we see, yeah, the guy goes and takes the money from, Lil Z and Benny, And that again, like the unfairness is, because we don't know at that time, but we do see later, yeah, like they, they didn't exactly earn it, they robbed it, but that is, by the law of this sort of environment, that should be their money, but they're kids. So this guy thinks that he can get away with treating them like shit. And it turns out that's not the case. And it's a very clever, is that called a psych out? The thing about how, he's like, oh, you should have this gun. You might need it. And then, Western style, he spins it around and then shoots. And we go from child little z to adult little z shooting people. And that is such a great transition because that's what he's been doing. We don't need to see him shooting a ton of different people through that. And again, the camera is on him, both as a child, as an adult, and as an adult as he's shooting. But we have there's the one gangster who falls in love, seemingly. And I thought they did a really good job with her character of, like, at first she's playing hard to get. She has to make sure that he's serious. She does find him charming, as many, there's a lot of people throughout history who have found people charming who, they were like, I don't know about this person, though. They are violent, they are dangerous, but, and yeah, she keeps pushing to see, is he still going to stay? Because if he, at some point around, if he had said, okay, fine, I don't want to be with you, then that would have answered that question for her. But because she pushes and he stays around, that means he does really want to be with her. And she points out she does want children, but she doesn't want the father to be a gangster. And I really appreciated the depiction of consent. He makes it clear through his body language that he wants to kiss her. She's the one who closes the distance. If you didn't notice, watch the scene again carefully. Like, he does not force a kiss on her. I've made my point. Moving on. And he gets shot because he, like the driver tells him the cops are right over there, and he's like, I don't care. And then he has to push the car, and the cops shoot him. And she points a gun at the driver because, like, even though she did not want to get into this life, she's now in love with this guy. And yeah, I think that does bring us to, so there's the flashback where we see little Z go and kill the various people. I also like the detail that one of the robbers, at least one of them, like, does point a gun at some of them, and one of them, like, until there's gunfire nearby, he's so quiet. He's staring some, but he goes for the money. He, like, I think if there hadn't been a gunshot, he would have left before they realized he was there. Like, they would have realized once the money was gone, but yeah. And I think that's around the time in the movie where they start talking about how Rocket is still a virgin. And again, that's, it's part of that environment, and it's not really a positive thing, but it is a real thing, and it's only by the end that they actually stop when he has sex, and then they start talking about, like, oh, was she even good in bed, objectifying her, even though she was nice to him, because sadly, a lot of men, once they have sex with a woman, especially if the sex happens not very long after meeting her, they no longer respect her. And that's such bullshit, because so many of these men will also whine and scream to high heaven about, like, oh, why won't women just have sex with me as soon as I meet them? I don't know. Maybe because you start treating them like absolute garbage as soon as they do. Maybe they want to make sure that that's not going to happen. Casual sex, polyamory, and such are not inherently wrong. There's just so much shame about it, especially for women. And let's see, that brings us to, I also appreciated the very frank conversation between, two women about, like, one of them describes how sex, yeah, what she thinks is great sexually, and the other one is a little, you know, she's shy about it, but she does try, and it does not lead to bad sex or rape, which, no, those are not the same thing, but it does lead to the father murdering her, burying her. Did they say she was buried alive? Yeah, he knocks her out and then buries her while she's still alive because he couldn't handle her sexual agency. And yeah, again, very, very telling. And I think, yeah, I mean, I really appreciate that was actually her idea. I mean, she didn't, to have sex like that. I mean, obviously not the killing, but, she talked to someone else about sex, and that woman suggested something, and so she tried it. It wasn't the guy pushing on her, which I acknowledge that does sometimes happen, but it is really, we need to normalize women, you know, it being okay for women. It should be. There's nothing actually ethically wrong. Like, rape is ethically wrong, and yet you have a bunch of rape apologists talking about, like, oh, no, the real problem is women having agency in sex. If a woman suggests something that is not what the man wants, then she's horrible. I really look forward to... I mean, I'm not expecting it to happen anytime soon, but I hope that eventually people will stop making excuses for the people in the Epstein files. One of the worst ones was that one that said, oh, but there's so many people in there, though. Yeah, that's part of the problem, The fact that so many people were willing to engage in pedophilia. And obviously, I'm not saying that if someone is just mentioned, but there isn't like a smoking gun, and the smoking gun can be witness testimony, obviously. Yeah, like, yeah, some people were mentioned, like Rebecca Watson did a really solid video on how she's technically in the Epstein files, but it's not because she, engaged with the fucking pedophile. And let's see, I think it was Vera Wild. I think it was Break Room of Geeks, but I can never remember. Maybe it was Council of Geeks, but one of her two channels. She talked about J.K. Rowling in the Epstein files, and that was also very, very even-handed video. Obviously, J.K. Rowling, Queen Turf, really, really terrible. She's responsible for some truly evil, which also, that segues nicely into recommending you watch the recent video by Essence of Thought about, a female model being, claimed to be trans because she does not conform to gender norms. And I think that does cover that. Let's see. But yeah, it is very clear from this small segment of the movie, sex, like, is not necessarily, like, it is not always, sometimes a major problem when it comes to sex is consent. And the movie acknowledges that later when Lil Z rapes Knockout Ned's, partner. But sometimes the problem is not consent, but someone, it's like that meme, the man consents, the woman consents, but isn't there someone you forgot to ask? Jesus didn't consent to premarital sex. And yeah, this father would rather have a dead daughter than one who has sex in a way that he does not approve of. There was consent. It's not like she was, engaging in pedophilia or bestiality or something. Yeah, I think that brings us to the... Yeah, I really appreciate the way that, like, it's fairly early in the movie that the Tender Gang are over. because they were clearly popular. They rob something, and then I forget exactly what it was, but they're like, everyone have your fill, take some of this, and they're cheering because they're like, we can't afford this shit on our own, but we need it to live, you know, but they don't last. And some of it is Little Z. A strong case could be made that they could have gone on for a long time if not for Little Z, the killing. And also the part where they're, hiding up in the tree, and then one of them is like, I don't want to hide up here anymore. And the other one points out they might still be there, though. And, yeah, the cops get involved once someone dies. It's not enough for there to be crime, but killings, that's bad publicity. Now they have to get involved. And I thought this movie did a really solid job of, like, yeah, I mean, the cops seem to basically all be crooked, like, at different levels, sure. Not all of them are gun runners, but no one goes to the cops thinking that it will protect people. Perhaps I'm afraid yeah, I believe it's the same guy who kills his daughter. So, it's clear, like, it's not like he's a good guy or something. He wants something to happen to the killers, but that might also just be like self-preservation. He might be like, well, the cops are not as likely to get, because they don't even fucking show up if nobody dies, or is killed, so they're not as likely to kill, regular people, and he has family, so he might be worried about the family. It could be entirely out of self-interest. Can you tell I don't have a very high opinion of him? Violence against women is one of the fucking worst things you can do. And again, he didn't do it because, there was no choice. He was robbing. No, he killed his own flesh and blood because she did something that wasn't wrong, but he disapproved of personally. You could just have a fucking conversation with her, right? You're her father. Tell her that you don't want her to do this kind of thing. But I think that does bring us to... Yeah, and, we have the part where, one guy kicks out the person who is dealing because that person is just too nice. They also don't have the mindset, the grindset mindset to, they're a real beta, not a sigma or an alpha. So, yeah, they end up losing all this stuff because they were decent, and it's really no wonder that so many people end up really cynical and hardened, some nihilistic, from this kind of environment, and I really appreciate how much the movie does to get that across. And I think that does bring us to... Right, and it is indeed accurate. There are a lot of Black people in the slums of Brazil and other countries as well. Non-whites in countries that have a number of powerful white people, sometimes even not very high number, but very powerful white people. Yeah, people of color end up at the bottom because of white supremacy, not because these white people are actually better. And it is true that there are some white people in these slums, and if they behave in a way that fits the environment, then they do fit in. I think this is around the time where Angelica... So yeah, Rocket is not fond of Thiago, and yeah, we have that little slightly incel move of, Thiago, you're not in shadow enough. Can you lean back a little? Perfect, Angelica is a character that they could have given more dimension to. Like I felt like they did a decent job on the young woman who falls in love with one of the gangsters and ends up holding a gun on this innocent guy driving because they need a ride out of there. But yeah, Angelica, like by the end of this film, I wouldn't say that I know that much about her, just that several people want her and she's understandably very upset when, you know, at the killing. Um, but that's basically it. But I do really appreciate, she's also not this like saint. Like she smokes weed, and yeah. So we have the part where, the kid gangsters are, kind of ruining the vibe there on the beach, and so he lets them just have the spliff, which again, that bit of kindness ends up getting him fired later. And I think that covers. Yeah, the whole thing with Jago was also nicely done. Angelica breaks up with him, and so he starts doing a lot of drugs. He's not taking it well, and it is, it has been documented. So sometimes when I say the following, like it's a scientific fact, but I worry that I sound like a fucking incel or something. Like I do personally love love. I think, all kinds of love, not only romantic, but I think the love we human beings can have for one another, and when we act on that and make someone else's life better, that's wonderful. That's one of the best things in the world. But it has been, proven that technically, the honeymoon period, like the being in love period, not the creepy uppy kind of love that grows on you like a tumor, that is technically fairly similar to being on drugs, and there's at least one mental illness that it is also similar to. And so he swaps one drug for another, basically, But yeah, the way that, normally someone like him would end up at the beck and call, but instead, yeah, he's friends with Benny, and that whole thing works out for a while. I guess that brings us to the, let's see. Yeah, and Knockout Ned also, genuinely really compelling, and the fact that, like, at first he does not get into any violence. He's just like, hey, if, I can still hit someone, as like, but it's only once he faces violence that he himself, overtly like that, he knows is a violent environment, but he has a job, and it's only after, and it is little Z, at first, a Knockout Ned just goes home. It's only after that, then he goes with, okay, so the Danish translation called him Carrot, so I guess I should, you know what, I will just very briefly, because I did copy in the nicknames, let's see, from IMDb Trivia. Let's see if I can find it real quick. Okay, I'll try to fill the dead air while oh, there we go. So let's see if I can actually find, okay, I do not see a name actually corresponding to, so I guess I will just have to call him Carrot, because I have no clue which one of these anyway, yeah, Carrot is where Knockout Ned ends up staying, because how else is he going to be safe? And then Carrot says, if you're going to stay here, you have to be a gangster. And that's how it goes. That is how some people have ended up in that kind of situation. And then you have these like middle to upper class, cishet white, not exclusively men, conservatives saying, oh, why can't they just make better choices? Why couldn't they just have been born into a comfortable living like me and everyone I know face to face that I learned the proper name of? Obviously not. Those people of color who are like my servants, like, they're not as good because they were not born white. And I think that does bring us to the yeah, also, Benny, the way that it ends up, like, if, he gets killed for being close to Little Z, even though he was leaving. And the part where, yeah, he gets, like, he keeps trying to de-escalate. He's like, come on, Little Z, you're going too far. You don't have to kill this person. And, oh, I guess this is a good time to briefly talk about. So yeah, the part where, not only does he, one of them ends up shot in the foot and another ends up killed of the child gangsters. Not only does Lil Z make that happen, he pressures someone else into participating, and he pulls the classic bully move of trying to get the target to choose how to be harmed and then doing something else. So they both have the shame of having, said, okay, do this to me, but then also the thing they asked to not have done to them was done to them. Yeah, he is a bully. He likes when other people are in pain. He just wants power for its own sake. He can't handle when people he wants to like him do not. He's very petty and vengeful. He's completely incapable of, too big a pause there, incapable of controlling his impulses. And if he was white, or I guess orange, and lived in America, maybe he'd be president right now. But yeah, and he actually thought that would intimidate them. He didn't think, hey, they're going to remember this and they're just going to be waiting. Because, like, yeah, they're at the end. He's lost all power. The cops take every bit of profit that he had. And, yeah, who's going to, there isn't anyone who's going to get revenge for him because he doesn't really inspire loyalty so much as just scare people. And eventually that's not going to, keep protecting him. And, obviously I don't hope that Donald Trump ends up dead anytime soon. I'd much rather see him spend years trying to atone for what he's done, engage in restorative rather than retributive justice. But I do think it is a matter of time before he's no longer going to be able to keep doing what he's doing. And yeah, I hope that I've made my point. I'm going to move on. Still working on that. Not belaboring the point. Anyway, I think that does bring us to, yeah, so Benny, he talks to Challen, and, there's the thing about, he's like, oh, that's such a nice shirt. I mean, I'm not the best judge of that. I was sitting there thinking, oh, now I know where's Waldo. But yeah, he goes with him, they bike ride, and I like that Chago is like, he's close to the Little Z. If I win, he might, that might end badly for me. But he goes, yeah, yeah, the what's the word? Yeah, shit, where was I? Swear I'm gonna get back to it post haste. The yeah, bike ride, and he's like, can you buy me stuff that's like that, and like, how am I gonna measure it? It's just against me, against yourself. That's how it, and he comes back with all that stuff, and Benny shows up, and Lil Z makes fun of him. And it's, again, this thing of like, Lil Z is constantly creating his own problems. It's like, what's the issue here? Like he wanted to wear this, you have the money, like you're just sitting around, you know, like all Lil Z does is sit around bragging or go out and do something that he knows is unethical, and he keeps doing it after it's no longer necessary. And I did appreciate, like, technically, there's the thing about, like, he doesn't want the child gangsters to be robbing, although, why why not just like hire them instead of using violence to teach them not to rob people? But yeah, that's where his head is at, because they are attracting police attention, and that could be really bad for everyone in the favela, although he's obviously primarily thinking about himself and his operation. And so we have the party where they play the music I mentioned in the review, and I think that pretty much, you know what, now that I've yeah, one of them is by James Brown. If you haven't already, I know the movie Birds of Prey is not for everyone. The song itself is online as well. There is a cover of This Is a Man's World, performed wonderfully in that movie, and yeah, it's fantastic. I would not have guessed that I would hear a version of that I would like better than the original, but she fucking nails it, like holy shit. Anyway, yeah, at this party, he does invite gangsters, and there ends up being violence against innocent people. He thought he could just leave this world. He thought he could be part of both worlds, because he does invite people who have nothing to do with this crime world, and Rocket is even there, and one of the things that goes wrong is that little Z, and it's such fucking incel shit. He goes up to, it's this thing of like, he's never danced before, and we see on his face, he's like, if I don't dance, people are going to be like, why isn't he dancing? Can he not get a partner? And so he goes up to a girl and awkwardly has to ask multiple times, because he's not quite being loud enough to be heard over the music. And she just says, no, I'm here with someone. Like, she didn't tell him to fuck off, but he can't handle even that, I mean, listen, it sucks to be rejected, but if you ask someone, to date or dance or that sort of thing, yeah, there's some chance you're going to be rejected, and you have to be able to handle that. I'm a big believer in, if you are going to get violent if you get a no, then don't ask. And yeah, he's so angry at this guy who didn't even fucking do anything. And, he forces him to strip, and a bunch of people are laughing because he feels humiliated. And so he has to, it's a zero-sum game for him. He has to hurt someone else. And then he sees Benny giving the camera that they don't know how to fucking use to Rocket, who loves taking pictures, and he gets angry. He has such a frail ego, and his ego is indeed controlling his every action. And Benny ends up getting shot instead of Lil Zay, because he was close to Lil Zay, and they were moving a little too much, And let's see, and that was also, an act of revenge. He was, I definitely do not feel comfortable referring to him by the name that the Danish subtitles gave him, but yeah, I mean, you know what character I'm talking about, so you can probably get, I mean, it's racial, possibly racist, which, yeah, I hate to say it. I wish it wasn't true, but my country, Denmark, there is a problem with racism. We are, in some ways, you know, from the American point of view, far left, but we're social democrats by, and a lot of us, but I am further left than social democrat now, but I used to be social soc dem. Anyway, the yeah, he Little Zay took from him, and so he wanted to kill him, and Carrot shoots him to make up for that. He's not gonna hide someone who, yeah. And I think that's around the time when the let's see, yeah. So Knockout Ned, you have that thing about, yeah. I don't love that the physical appearance is brought up as part of it, but they do also make sure to say, part of the reason that girls do not want, let's say, for him to have sex, it has to be prostitution or rape. And part of it is that he's ugly, but part of it is that he is cruel. Women do not feel safe around him. And this was the choice that he made. He could have, even if, it's one thing that he killed those at the motel out of frustration with the rest of the gang and such. Nobody knew that was him. He could have made that the end because he was making money. He was doing well, but he insisted. He wanted as much power as possible, which is part of what ends up getting him killed, and Carrot arrested. But he hates that Knockout Ned is, come to think of it, I actually don't know if they call him Knockout because of the punching or because he is a knockout, like physically, and, people like him. But yeah, he rapes, Lizzie rapes Knockout Ned's partner whilst forcing him to watch. And that is an area where the movie, it would have been much better if it actually went into how it affects her. It only talks about how it affects Knockout Ned. And I mean, not long after, he's negatively affected by male family members of his being killed by Little Zay, who just wants to kill Knockout Ned. I feel like it could have, I appreciate, so this was something I decided not to say in the spoilers review. The movie ends with saying that it's based on true events. So maybe the rape actually happened, but there is, you are allowed to change things. And again, hypothetically, you could just have that character is in, I also kind of felt like Angelica a little bit disappears, after the party. And I get why, she was with Benny and now he's dead. And Lil Zay does not really like her, but the movie needs a tiny bit more focus on the women, or to just not have women there, one or the other, in my opinion. But the yeah, I think that brings us right. And I will, I do think they do reasonably well on Mariana. I'll talk about her when I get to that scene. But yeah, one thing I do appreciate about the rape is they don't spend forever on it, and it is not particularly graphic. Like, we see vague thrusting. It's obvious that it's rape. There's no doubt about that. But it is not sexualizing it. It is not eroticizing it. That's such a fucked up thing. That is a thing that has happened in a number of movies. And let's see, yeah, there's the thing about this almost like morbidly humorous thing of why didn't he shoot him? And then Lizay's like, wait, why didn't I shoot him? And then he goes back to shoot him. And, this, what was it, like, cousin maybe, or nephew, something like that. Or his uncle and brother, male relative of some, he hides a knife in his pants, and he does manage to stab, but only in the arm, and he gets killed. And it's like, well, little Z, what did you think was going to happen? You're there to shoot someone. You're there to kill his family member, and you don't think there's any chance at all that he might try to use violence to stop you, but he thinks he can intimidate everyone. Again, very Trump. I think that does bring us to, that Knockout Ned becomes a member of Carrot's gang because there's just no choice. If he leaves, that was also such a great moment. This thing of like, he runs up, this kid runs up, says, hey, if you shoot Knockout Ned, that would mean a truce. And he's just like, did you hear that, Knockout Ned? And I thought it worked really well that they do this sort of picture-in-picture thing for catching the kid. Catch that kid. And I think, does that bring us to the, let's see. So there's the, so we get a short montage of, Knockout Ned. At first he's like, we said no killing. And then not long after, Carrot kills someone, and it saves Knockout Ned's life. And now Knockout Ned is also willing to engage in violence, And there's that thing about, that's when Knockout Ned learned rules are meant to be broken. And, At this point, I feel I should say, I am of the opinion that rules are meant to be understood, and if deemed wrong, broken. But you should not inherently either obey or break every rule you come across. It is not automatically good just because, not every rule is fair. And if you, think the rule you're breaking is unfair, and then it's explained to you why it's fair, admit you made a mistake and apologize and try not to do it again. That is not a sign of weakness, it is a sign of strength. Weakness is being unwilling to admit when you're wrong. And that's also something we're seeing very much from Trump and ICE and Trump's cabinet right now. It's genuinely pathetic. Like, they're acting like small children, spoiled little children. Anyway, I think that might bring us to the, I think, around there is when Lil Z fucks up by, fucking over one of the gun runners. And, the gun runner keeps trying to appease him. And Lil Z is not having it because he's not getting what he wants. And he's not accepting, because I wouldn't rule out, it might be true. He says you cannot get an AR-15 in Brazil. He gets him stuff that perhaps not quite, one of the things he gets, I believe, has a higher firing rate. It's just, you can't carry it the way you can an AR-15. And it also does get him something that, like what he gets him. I used to, know a lot about guns, and I remember enough to say these are really good. From first-person shooters, third-person shooters, that sort of thing. I never have and never will. I doubt I'd even be able to do it in self-defense, fire a gun in real life. Anyway, and then he's told, you leave without the guns and without your money. And the gun runner, who is indeed law enforcement, and that's an actual thing. There are, I'm not saying all, but a number of gun runners were, or have connections to law enforcement or military, because at the end of the day, like, a bunch of those people, they just kind of want the power, and sometimes it's from having a gun, using a gun. Sometimes it's, selling it and getting a bunch of money from it, and and that's when the police start cracking down on this situation. And I believe that is around the time when we get to Mariana. So Rocket, there's that thing about like, oh, take my picture. And it's like, I don't know how. And it's, again, like Little Z, he's not even the one who solves it, but he does at least accept that's not nothing, I guess. It's just extremely close. But I think it's Thiago who goes on like, hey, Rocket is a photographer. Because, like, listen, I've had a camera in my hand. I'm not a photographer. if you don't know what the fuck you're doing, it's not going to work, you know? And yeah, Rocket makes the camera work and takes pictures, and he has them pose in the, and genuinely, like, holy shit, this guy knows how to do this. Like, it really is. And Lil Z's own, like, I mean, that is part of the problem. You know, they don't like that he's in the paper. Yeah, that's also part of why I think that was also the gun runner. You know, that why he wants the right. Also, there's that montage where a bunch of people are just randomly being arrested because the cops are trying to intimidate. They are using the same basic methods. They are just less lethal than some of these gangs, but you know, it's not actually justice. It's just power. And that is so often the case when law enforcement deals with minorities. You know, they protect the powerful from the powerless. They are modern day slave patrols. I saw someone point that out recently about ICE. You don't have to say that they're like Nazis of the Third Reich. Now we have to specify that because Trump is trying to make America into the Fourth Reich. You can just say that they are modern slave patrols because Hitler did take inspiration from racism in America, white supremacy in America. He used Jim Crow laws to model some of his anti-Jewish laws. It is sad but true. America has technically never not been fascist towards ethnic and racial minorities. And to be clear, when we're talking, you know, race is referring to not, oh, you know, like some people use race to claim this absurd idea that white people are somehow inherently superior. It's so fucking ridiculous. It's the kind of thing that makes me wonder if they've ever met at least some white people and at least some racial minorities, because, like, if you have and you still have that opinion, I don't think you're being honest with yourself. I think you just, you know, embrace bigotry, and that is a choice. Like, you can choose to not be bigoted. There are just factors that make it more likely for you to be bigoted. But there are people who have chosen to leave behind bigotry. And especially now that we have the internet, it's so easy to find information that can help you not be bigoted. I will admit, I was not always, I would like to think I was never, like, terrible, but there were issues where I needed to become better at understanding these things, you know. I've always had sympathy towards minorities, but I did not always understand why things were the way they were. I used to fall for that bullshit. You know, there was that, I hesitate to call it scientific because it was terrible science, but there was a paper that insisted, oh, you know, it doesn't actually make trans people happy to have them transition. And, you know, thankfully that has been thoroughly debunked. You know, one of my fellow leftist YouTubers, Jamie Dodger, has done videos talking about, yeah, the, I think, let's see. Yes, so yeah, you know, so when I say race, I am not saying that if you're not white, you are somehow inferior. That is fucking bullshit. Anyway, okay, at this point, I'll keep it short. Many of the nicest people I've ever met were Muslim immigrants here to Denmark from the Middle East. Whether we're talking first generation, second, third, just warm, wonderful people who will literally stop their day, at least some of them, to help a stranger. And I've seen, you know, there are people here in Denmark, white people, especially the conservative ones, who can know someone for decades and refuse to help, even if it would be just absolutely no effort for them. And a bunch of American cishet white conservative men are even worse. Anyway, the let's see. I think that, and to be clear, I'm not talking about all fucking white people. I'm white. Anyway, I'm talking about the culture. Yes. So the yeah. So he takes the pictures, and then they're like, okay, so show us to them. Show them to us. And he's like, well, I mean, I have to develop them first, and we're sitting there thinking, oh shit, is Lil Z gonna accept that? But thankfully, he's so badly, he wants his picture in the paper, because they put the other person in the paper, and it's like, yeah, because you know like there's fucking reasons why he's the one and not you. And yeah, that's so devastating when he explains, well, Lil Z is having people killed who just know me. Some people are getting killed because he thinks they know me. Yeah, that might get you in the paper. That's something people want to know is happening. And I guess, let's see, I think that, isn't there at least one more thing around there that, yeah, and this thing about like how, oh, they're just leaving Lil Z alone. I get arrested, but not him. But yeah, so the, let's see. I don't think I made a big enough deal of, I really love the fact that, when Benny makes a party and invites, I mean, it's not everyone, but like everyone that he thinks would be good for this party and friends of his and such, until Little Z fucks it up, everyone is having a good time. Like nobody even went after Little Z, but he has to fucking ruin it. And let's see, I think the next thing was so yeah, he needs to develop the film, and he talks to the what's the word, the journalist. And that was also great, this thing of like, he comes in and he's like, he said on the way there, this guy takes amazing pictures, and this guy, he's a big fan of yours, you've got good taste. And then later he's like, I don't know, I'm not allowed, only the journalists are allowed to develop film. Okay. And the photographer overhears that, and he's like, develop this and this. That's genuinely nice. And yeah, so he has it developed, and then Mariana finds it, and it's like, yeah, it's, yeah, so yeah, we see that the picture ends up in the paper, and Rocket thinks he's in trouble. Lil Z's actually fucking love it. He buys seemingly every fucking copy of the paper. But yeah, Rocket thinks he's gonna end up dead, and so yeah, it said in the paper who submitted them, and so he goes up and finds her, and this was a scene that did a pretty good job fighting back against misogyny, because let's be clear, she did not actually do anything wrong. She had no fucking idea that he did not want those pictures in there. She says as much, and she is calm, she is rational, she is logical, she makes an argument, and she de-escalates the situation, and once, and then it's like, okay, what's your name? Rocket, I'm Mariana. She could easily have had him kicked out of there. I believe she would have been well within her rights, but she appreciates, hey, if we can just resolve this situation, this could be really beneficial for both of us. And she points out, listen, you will get money for this. This could help you earn a living. We just need to you have to stop yelling. You have to calm down. And yeah, there are so many situations in real life where it is the man who is angry and, frankly out of control, and a woman at least tries to, and sadly a lot of men refuse to let a woman calm them down because they feel like that's weakness, which again, that's backwards. That's literally, it is not weakness to calm down when a situation is being resolved. We have to get better. As I'm in a lot of ways a member of the majority. We have to get better at listening to minorities. It is crucial. There is so much pain that originates from members of the majority refusing to listen to members of minority groups. And let's see, yeah, and so we have the thing about, the where is he going to sleep, and he ends up sleeping at her place. And apparently, according to IMDb trivia, him talking about how he never has hot showers, that was like a hot mic moment. That was not in the script. He actually did back then live in, conditions somewhat similar. And yeah, like between shots, he talked about that, and he didn't realize that they were still recording, or didn't think that they would use it. And that might also be part of why it's like dialogue overlaid. We don't see their lips move during that. We don't even see them. And it works, and it's so authentic. And they end up having sex in the shower. And yeah, not long after, he's talking about how it was having sex with her. And yeah. And again, like, there's nothing inherently wrong with her choosing to have sex with, and like, it's too bad that a lot of people refuse to acknowledge this, but yeah, like, women and men, people of all genders, sometimes find talent really attractive. Like, it's not like she picked him off the street or something, which, if that's what you want to do, as long as you're being safe about it, as long as there's consent, it's not really something I want to tell people not to, please, if you're looking for advice on how to be sexual as a woman, please primarily listen to other women, especially the leftist ones, for example, intellectual, intellectual or intellectual media. God damn it! I'm sorry, I forget her. I'm a big fan of her channel, but I right now forget if it's both of those words or just one of them. But yeah, she draws lines when it comes to sex that, when I heard them, I've seen a lot of leftist women not super, that they're worried about, some of them are worried about, being thought of as like just as a sex negative feminist. But yeah, I heard Lexual talk about it, and it was like, that's completely reasonable. Like, which, to be clear, I'm not saying that I am like the arbiter of that or something. Just giving my opinion, which does not hold as much weight, should not hold as much weight as that of women. But the, she's attracted to him because he is an amazing photographer. Like, we see those images. Like, he really has an eye for this. And I think the next thing is when so we go back to the part from the beginning, and the what's the word? Let's see. There's he wants his picture taken, and so they scare off the cops. Oh right, I also appreciated the part where as the gang war, I guess that is around this part. Yeah, the gang war is intensifying, and we have this thing about they would use they would just use it as an excuse to get into violence. And yeah, that guy, he wanted revenge, so he lied about why he was there. And yeah, the I think, doesn't that bring us to the so Rocket is trying to take their picture, and there's a gunshot at the same, he is being shot in more ways than one, or shot at, Lil Z and his gang. And I really appreciated that acknowledgement. And without it be, it would have been annoying if someone felt the need to spell it out in dialogue, because like the visual, the editing makes it completely clear. while media coverage does not always lead to increased violence, it can, and it is never apolitical. It is simply not possible to cover major events in a way that is purely informational. As great as it would be, there's always going to be a point of view. When you are taking a picture, you're choosing the angle, the framing. You're choosing what to not show. And Rocket's photos are not neutral. They are not when he is taking glamorizing pictures of, that's one, and the movie itself, I would argue, is not glamorizing. Those pictures are, but they're also being taken by someone who, like, we're not supposed to think that it's great that he takes, like, some good comes of it, sure. And at the end, when he takes pictures, more pictures of Lil Z, that was what he wanted, right? He wanted just picture taking. That is also very much not, and his choice to not show the cops, taking the bribe and releasing this prisoner. Yeah. And it ends up, the one he has developed and printed. Wait, did he have the others developed? The one he has printed in the paper is the one that shows the bullet-ridden corpse. Because then people can make up their own minds about who did it. He has not made an enemy of the child gangsters or the police, both of which could get him killed. Perhaps especially the police. And yeah, I thought the climax did a fantastic job of not getting into actual, like, that's a place. I read the reviews that said it glorified before watching it the first time, and I thought, oh, maybe the climax is where that happens. And in my opinion, no, like, it is just this, like, chaotic, not impossible to follow, but, series of violent encounters, and yeah, like, nobody looks good doing it. Nobody is really completely in the right. It's just, Little Z committed all this brutal violence, and now the chickens are coming home to roost because one of them was caught after it ran away. And yeah, the let's see. Yeah, we have the act of revenge just after Knockout Ned was, like, kind to him. He's saying, listen, I will get you help, but you have to, you can't move. And that's true. He could greatly worsen the injury if he moves. And yeah, it culminates in Little Z bribing the cops, which we were also told, that was why that other criminal, and he died in prison because he didn't bribe the cops. And yeah, they take everything, and Little Z thinks he can just order these kids around. And yeah, they shoot him, and one of them calls it a Soviet attack. And yeah, it is reminiscent of yeah. And it's yeah, that's when it said, this was based on true story, and we see footage of the real Knockout Ned, I think it is, and we see some pictures of the real people side to side with pictures of the I think it's one picture per person, but yeah, picture of the actor, a picture of the real person that they're playing. And yeah, he mentioned, this photo will get me a job, this photo will make me famous, this photo though, and so he makes a very careful decision. And yeah, he says, a picture can change the world, but in City of God, either they take you or you still get, have your life ruined. And yeah, I don't know, maybe I've already made it clear, but I do really, really appreciate how much empathy this movie has for people in a completely fucked up situation that they do not have full control over. And there at the end, the child gangsters, they're making an enemies list. So they're going to be the next Trump, I mean little Z, of the City of God, and they're talking about all the people that they're going to have killed. And there's that one kid who's, he's still limping, but he's still part of their group, and none of them ever forgot that little Z is why their friend is dead. And so I've already mentioned how this book ends the movie, and yeah, this is a world where kids are forced to grow up fast, which is, demonstrated by, psychology research, is not healthy. You should have, you should grow more over time. And there's that chilling bit where one of these kids insists, because he smokes weed, sniffs coke, kills and robs, he is a man. He is an adult because he is engaging in these things that a lot of the time it's only the adults. He does not think that being ethical is part of being an adult, being a human being. And yeah, watching these child gangsters, walk away from the camera, which is mostly steady at that point. It's making clear, like, there's, this is going to go on, basically. Generations of child gangsters, power struggles, and this might not be the last gang war in the streets, based on the movie. I mean, and yeah, like, as mentioned at the start of this video, poverty and need is the mother of crime. Violence begets violence. They're going to keep killing, I mean, it's a situation that needs to be dealt with through social programs, through improving their lives, not through just harshly, because we do see, throughout the film, the cops do get involved, but they don't stop. Like, they might stop a temporary, it's a Band-Aid on a cancerous tumor, it's never going to the root and solving the problem. So the violence continues. It's a vicious cycle. It just goes around and around. Never stops. That's what makes this vicious and a cycle.